Did anyone manage to find awareness? I'm still looking. If you find it, let me know.
How can you find something non-materialistic using a method which is materialistic, well, easy?
Using a method that's materialistic.
In a way that well easy.
Because we grasp on to the mind in that way. I mean, generally we tend to feel like the mind is somewhere here. Why? Because one reason is that most of our sense faculties are here, and particularly visual is dominant, and hearing is here, smell, taste, it's all here. So it seems like the control center, the mind, is just somewhere just in behind there, you know. That's what it seems like, doesn't it? So that's what we're looking for. That's what we're looking to see. And you're right. Again, intellectually, we can refute easy using arguments like this, but again, just like intellectually, we know things are impermanent. Then you say, well, why do I bother looking? Because I know they're impermanent. Because we need to go from intellectual to experience. Otherwise, it's an intellectual idea, which may be correct, but it doesn't help. Exactly, because the intellectual mind will say, why are we doing this? I know the answer. The same, if we're doing a meditation on impermanence, intellectual mind goes, what are you doing that for? I know the body's impermanent. But then we're blocked. It's like a scientist who wants to discover the truth about something. He has a theory, maybe a valid theory, and he goes, I'm not going to run the experiment because I know the answer. I mean, then we'll never find out anything, will we? We need to run the experiment. So we need to get that intellectual mind and give it a holiday. So take a holiday. Take a holiday, I'm going to look. Otherwise, we're a scientist that just, my theory's right, I don't need to run the experiment. And then, of course, never prove anything. And it never proves anything. Same here. We know things are impermanent, but we need to come to experience that. We need to come to see reality as it is and not just understand reality, this process. Otherwise, nothing's going to change in our life. So, again, here with this sort of practice is just look. Just look.
Mind is clear knowing. What is awareness? What is the lowering, I forgot the word.
Yeah. So here, when we're talking about resting in awareness, we're using the word awareness to mean the same as mind. Consciousness, mind, awareness, same. If we speak generally, what we have to be careful of is that different traditions and different translators use this word awareness to mean different things. So it gets very confusing.
But in meditation...
So here, when I'm saying resting in awareness, I could equally say rest in the mind, rest in consciousness, same.
So it is the same, there's no different meditation on the awareness and the mind, because I know that in shamatha you have
because one is observing the mind and the other is resting in awareness. So to use the analogy that the mind is like the sky and the thoughts are like the clouds moving through the sky, then that meditation observing the mind is observing the sky plus the thoughts that are moving through the mind, the sky of the mind. In this practice, we're not, experientially, we're not observing the sky, we're being the sky. But it's still the sky. So when I say observe the mind, it has much more of a dualistic flavor to it. It's like, I'm observing this mind. Whereas if I say rest in awareness, it doesn't feel so dualistic. It's like, yeah, it's the same. Sorry? Correct.
So there's no designation of awareness as to different from mind, clear knowing.
There is in different traditions because they use the word awareness to mean different things.
In Mahayana,
in Tibetan Buddhism. I know of at least 4 or 5 different ways the word awareness is used. Very confusing. Very confusing. But here, when we're speaking very generally, you can assume resting in awareness is resting in the mind.
Still, when resting in the mind, you're still the one who rests in.
So then, as part of the wisdom practice, if we're having this sense there's an observer, look for the observer. I mean, we didn't specifically do that in meditation, but that is a valid way of looking. We looked in different ways here, but we could be resting, and then I could say, who's doing this? Who's the observer? Who's resting? That is a valid question. And then you look. You look. Is there a separate observer or not? You look and see what you see. See what you see. And again, these questions is not like, oh, I need to get the right answer. There's nothing about getting the right answer. It's about what you see. And like a scientist, we need to keep running the experiment. We don't run it once and go, there you go, I got the answer. I mean, a scientist runs the experiment many times, many times. So similarly, we need to run the experiment many times. And we need to run it with functioning equipment. Now our mind is distracted and dull, and so we run it 100 times, we get 100 different results. So what we need to do is fine-tune the mind through shamatha practice. So in this particular approach, we would simply then spend more time just resting in awareness, just that, until our mind becomes more stable, more clear. Then we start some investigation. Then we can maybe come to see something.
Awareness can exist without body. It was like very confusing, because it's like when you ask where is awareness, but it's like to become awareness, you need the body. That's what's
Yeah, but remember here, we're just investigating awareness in this practice. We're not investigating the relationship to the body or the person. We're just investigating awareness. From that investigation, you may come to some insight with the regarding relationship between awareness and body, but we're not investigating, in this practice, we're not investigating the body. There are other practices where we would investigate the body. So here we're just simply we're just investigating awareness to come to understand awareness better, to come to some insight.
I'm trying to understand if it can exist without body.
Look. Look. But you could come to some insight with regard to that.
Can you say the awareness is like a space?
You can say it's like space, yes. In fact, we often have that, well, that's like the sky, space. So yes, there are often analogies that can help to understand. Yes, sure, you can say that.
I may have missed the whole meditation, because when you instructed us to look for the awareness, I said, Glen has instructed me to look for awareness, which is a mere concept imputed by my deluded mind.
No, but see, that's all completely intellectual. No. So that's the point, is that if our intellectual mind comes in when we hear the question, we'll go, well, I know the answer. Well, what are we doing this for? I know the answer. It's merely labelled, or it's not physical, and we don't do the practice, and then we never really see. We're just accepting our idea, which may be a good idea.
I mean, I was looking for it, but very briefly, I have to admit.
Right.
And I said, well, where is it? Well, it's not in here, it's not in here, it's not there. It's a mere concept.
Right, but I don't think...
I didn't
Yeah, but you could...
conclusion like in a flesh.
No, and that's because mainly at our level is because those two things, is that our mind is not very clear and focused, so we sort of look and we go, well, I don't know really. And we turn it into an intellectual exercise. We do a sort of a vague look and we go, oh yeah, that confirms what I know. We don't really do a very thorough search. It's like, again, the example of we're looking for a person in a house, We sort of go in the house and we sort of look just very briefly, not really thoroughly. And we go, oh yeah, he's not in the house because I knew that he wasn't going to be here. But then we didn't really find out anything. Because all we did was did a vague search because our idea was they're not in the house. And so since we looked very briefly, we go, no, they're not in the house. And then we never find out. So we need to really look. But again, now we're like a person who's sort of half blind trying to look in a house. And we go, I don't know. So that's why we need to make our eyesight better, shamatha, and then we need to search thoroughly, vipassana, in a thorough way. Then we can come to some really clear conclusion. Solid conclusion, definitely. I looked very clearly, I looked thoroughly, wasn't there. Boof, that's something. Whereas if we look very briefly and we poor eyesight, I mean, we go, well, I don't know, I didn't see them, but I don't know.
If I continue this analogy of looking for a person, when I look for a person, I know what I'm looking for.
Correct. And so that's what, yeah.
How can I look for something that before I'm starting looking, I'm not sure what does it look like?
But you're resting in it. You're resting in it.
What is it?
Well, that's what you're doing the shamatha.
What is it?
The awareness. So that's why shamatha is important, because you're resting in that experience. That, you're seeing it directly. You're resting in that experience.
I can understand resting.
Right.
I know what it is resting, more or less. I can...
Right. And did you know you were aware? Did you know you were aware?
If I know if I'm aware while
Yeah.
I'm resting.
Yeah.
But is
Yeah.
aware contrary to sleeping?
Well, that you're completely lost in some thought or asleep. Yeah. So that is awareness, because you're resting in it. So if we rest in that and our mind becomes more clear, then it's like I'm showing you a picture of a person that you're going to look for, and your eyesight's becoming clearer and clearer and clearer, and you're looking at it, and you go, yeah, and then I say, where is it? And then you look. But if you rest without clarity, you're just sort of like half asleep or distracted, that would be me like having a picture of the person you're going to look for, showing it very briefly, and you have poor eyesight. And I say, look for that person. You'll go, what? What person? But if I show you that, and you're just looking at it very clearly, you get a very clear picture, don't you? And so that's what resting in awareness is. If you rest in that, and your mind becomes more clear, it's very vivid. And then when you look, then you'll get an answer, one way or the other.
Yeah, but what bothered me while doing the meditation is the verbs. Look for. Where is it?
Because that's what we're grasping to. We are grasping to the awareness usually being inside some small thing inside the head. So what we're trying to do is awareness existing as we think it does? Of course, if we have the experience that awareness has no location, then to say where is awareness?
That's my conclusion.
Right, because again, it's intellectual.
So that's why. Well, no, it's the experience that it's not somewhere, so that it's useless that I will be looking for it the way I know what looking for.
Right, so if you're having the experience that awareness is nowhere, and they say where is awareness, then you are having that insight already, because you're already having that experience.
It's not that it's nowhere. It's somewhere, not where, and not nowhere.
So it is somewhere?
It's everywhere.
It's aware.
Nowhere, everywhere.
It is. Right, but is this how we instinctively relate to our mind? No, so that's what we're trying to fix. And we won't fix it by intellectually going, it's nowhere because it's everywhere. I mean, then nothing's going to change. It's like, it's impermanent. Of course it's impermanent. I know that. Then nothing changes. We need to experience that. We need to see that directly. But again, if we're just resting there and the question comes, you go, yeah, I know that. Then nothing changes. You know, if we're looking at the body and I say, is the body impermanent? Your mind will go, of course, I know that. Then nothing changes. Nothing changes. So we need to get rid of that, and we need to look very clearly through experience. Then something can shift. So this is key.
Will you be kind enough to tell what is your inner conversation when you started this meditation? Because I succeeded not to understand anything in all this. Honestly, I don't understand. These are words, slogans, awareness. I don't know what you're talking about. So if you can, you open your eyes, you close your eyes. What did you say to Glen? What am I going to do now? Can you quote? What did you say to yourself?
So the question is, I'm not sure of what you're asking.
Simple question. I'm asking, you told us to
Right,
look at our
right,
I'm asking you, please,
Right.
can you say in words
right.
what was the process that you did with Glen? You did the same process with yourself.
Right.
Can you
So,
tell me, please?
yeah. So what I've done in this and the previous one is give you some examples of how to look.
Please, maybe rude. I'm asking you simple questions.
Right. My simple answer is,
What did you do? What did you, Glen, did 20 minutes ago when you started to tell us, okay, sit well, ta 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 ta.
what did I do? I was trying to give instructions to you to help you to do this meditation.
So you did not do the meditation.
Yeah, a little. Yeah, of course I did.
Can you tell me, please, what did you say to yourself?
Well, no, I did. I looked based on the question I asked.
You look
I-
for the awareness.
Yeah, like example, we'll use the person in a room.
You said to yourself, Glen, look for your attention now. What did you say to yourself?
When I said, where is it located, then I just look.
Where is what located? What did you say?
The awareness.
Where is my awareness, my Glen Svensson, my...
Well, the one that you're resting in, the one that you are directly experiencing, not some abstract concept, the thing that you are directly experiencing. That. Right. Like, if you are aware of the cup, then if I ask you to look for the cup, then you're looking for the thing that you're directly, like again, let's use the example of the person in the room. I show you a picture of a person, and I say, this is what you're going to look for. So you're directly experiencing the picture of the person. And then I give you instruction, I say, look in this room. So then you go, you look in that room. And then I say, now look in that room. You go off and you look in that room. And then you didn't find, and you knew there were only 2 rooms in the house. So on looking in that second room, and you didn't find, wouldn't there be some insight that this person is not in the house? So we're doing something like that here. But again, a number of challenges here is, one is we turn it into intellectual. And then we always have an answer based on whatever belief we have. And the second one is we don't know what we're looking for because our mind is very dull, not clear. That's why we need to do the shamatha practice, resting in awareness, stay there for days, weeks, later, maybe longer, just doing that practice, so that that picture of awareness becomes very clear. Then we know to look, what to look for. But if we don't do that, then again, it would be like if I say rest in awareness and we're not really doing that, it would be me like showing you this picture very clearly from a distance, so you can't see much. I flash it for a couple of seconds, and then I say to you, look for that person. What are you going to do? Nothing, because you don't know what you're looking for, because you didn't have a clear picture. Then you can look all day and you just get confused. What am I looking for? I don't know. Maybe some sort of person, he said. So this is the key. So that's why shamatha is the basis of vipassana, which means if we don't do shamatha practice, this vipassana practice is very difficult, if not a waste of time. Waste of time. You know, again, if you're example, if you're looking for a particular person in a crowded room, and I show you the picture very briefly and you don't see it clearly, I mean, we can look all day long and we won't be sure if the person's in the room. Then it'll be a waste of time. No? Better to say, give me the picture, and you look at it and you study it very closely. You go, yeah, okay. Then you look and you go, ah, there they are. Or, nope, they're not in the room. I know, because I know what I'm looking for. So this is the key. So it takes time. Yeah, then we need to move on.
I had a bit of a problem when you said awareness, then it became a bit vast and very open. Mm-hmm. And then I thought it's a general openness. And I said, where is my awareness? And then it starts to get very small instead of, and then I left it. And is there a difference between my awareness?
I mean, specifically, I worded it like that because you can say, where is it located? So as soon as I say, where is it located, then people turn it into a thing. So if I say, where is awareness located, then it's like, because if I say it, suddenly this awareness, which you're resting in, which is like this, suddenly it becomes this. So it's difficult to ask these questions in this sort of practice because they can we can interpret them a certain way and lead us astray, particularly this sort of awareness. The person practice is a little bit more straightforward, but because this awareness practice is a very different approach than looking for the person. So it's a little bit challenging to word the questions in such a way to guide us in the right direction in terms of the search. And then we need to move on.
I think that we objectify the word of awareness when we hear that we have to look for something. When we have to look for awareness, the only way that we know how to look for something is when we objectify whatever we have to look for.
Right, but again, we're looking for what we are experiencing in the present moment. Because we're resting in awareness. That's what we're looking for. We're not looking for some idea. We're looking for that. The thing that we are directly experiencing. That. Look for that. Not some idea of what we think it might be. The same as when we're looking for the person, then we need to look for the person that we are seeing and grasping onto right now. Not some abstract idea based on our intellectual beliefs. Okay, let's move on a bit. And actually what I want to do now is actually just do one session, because otherwise if we have a session, a break, another session, I think by the end our heads would have exploded. So I just want to focus on the next section of the text and maybe go a little bit longer, but then we'll finish. So maybe finishing, say, 4 o'clock or so, or maybe a bit after. So I think that's better than trying to do too much this afternoon because we're probably not going to absorb much. But the next 2 sections in the text are very important, very helpful. So we're now at verse 9. And verse 9 and 10 are really all about the idea that if nothing exists from its own side, nothing has true existence, we can't find anything, then how is there continuity? How do we what's called accumulate merit? Or who has the karmic imprints? And then what is it that goes from life to life? Because it seems like then that becomes impossible. And so that's what's being discussed here in verse 9 and 10. So let's have a look at those. So verse 9 says, merit, and merit is the result of our virtuous activities. So when we do some virtuous activity, and this is basically virtuous karma, you could say. So we do a virtuous action, then we have this imprint, then that later ripens as a result. And that result is called merit. So again, how does that work if there's no me, there's no container for all those actions? And so here, verse 9 says, merit arises with respect to illusory victors, just as with respect to entities. If sentient beings are like illusions, then having died, how are they reborn? So those second two lines, of course, in quotes, is the realists, the Vaibhashya saying, if sentient beings are like illusions, then what's reborn? How does rebirth work? And then the Madhyamikas answer that in the verse 10 says, for as long as those conditions are assembled, for that long will illusions also arise. Why should sentient beings be truly existent due merely to long continuity? So let's have a look at what His Holiness says about these two verses. So this is on page 40. And he says, next, the realists level the charge, or they assert that from the Madhyamika viewpoint, accumulation of merit becomes impossible, meaning we can't do a virtuous action and then get some good result later because there's no me that carries that. And then he says here the realists argue that according to the Madhyamikas, even the Buddhas are illusion-like and therefore not ultimately real. If this is so, they argue, how can we maintain that by venerating objects of refuge such as Buddhas, we can accumulate merit? So meaning, how can we then accumulate merit by doing virtuous activities? Meaning, how do we, by doing a virtuous action, get some result later? Because there seems to be no thing that's connecting the action now and the result later. To this, the Madhyamikas respond by saying that just as the realists believe that revering an intrinsically real Buddha accumulates intrinsically real merits, similarly in our system, we can say that venerating an illusion-like Buddha accumulates illusion-like merit. There is no inconsistency. So our rejection of intrinsic existence does not negate the possibility of accumulating merit. And we'll come back to that, but I want to go on to the taking rebirth now. I think it'll become more clear when we look at this point. And so we're looking then at the second two lines of verse 9, which says, if sentient beings are like illusions, then having died, how are they reborn? So if things are like an illusion, who or what takes rebirth? How does rebirth work? It can't work, can it? So here it says, His Holiness says, they argue that according to Madhyamika philosophy of emptiness, which denies true existence and posits existence only in nominal terms, i.e. merely labelled, the idea of rebirth becomes untenable, meaning impossible, because all sentient beings would be illusion-like. How can an illusory sentient being take rebirth after death? To this, the Madhyamikas respond by saying that not only is it possible, but your analogy actually confirms it. And then in verse 10 here, verse 10 here goes on to say, for as long as those conditions are assembled, for that long will illusions also arise. Why should sentient beings be truly existent due to merely to long continuity? So here then, His Holiness says, even illusions come into being only in dependence on causes and conditions. Once causes and conditions aggregate, then the result, in this case the illusion, arises. If there is no coming together of causes and conditions, then even something like an illusion will not arise. Similarly, as long as there exist within the mind stream relevant causes and conditions for taking rebirth, this will naturally lead to rebirth after death. So there's no incompatibility between upholding the theory of rebirth on one hand and maintaining the doctrine of emptiness on the other hand. So let's sort of have a look at that in a little bit more detail. So what is it that goes from life to life? What is it that takes rebirth? What is it that accumulates merit or does good actions and gets good results? And to answer that, we can begin by first looking at the material world. Now, there seems to be things, like this cup, moving through time. But if we look very closely here, is there any thing moving through time? Or is there just constant change? And so I think science has conclusively proved that all that's there is just constant change, constant change, constant change. So what we see at the physical world level is just a flow of change. And of course, we have to make sense of this flow of change, otherwise we can't function. So again, we draw lines, we create objects. So therefore, the cup is existing within our conceptual framework. It's our way of understanding flow and change. So the fact that the cup exists within conceptual framework is the flip side of emptiness, meaning there is no cup to be found there. But of course, we have causality there. And so the idea of merely labelled or emptiness is not negating causality at all. In fact, it confirms causality. And similarly, when we look at our mind, superficially, it seems like our mind is a thing moving through time. But if we look closely at our mind, what do we see? We see, like the physical world, a constant flow of change, a constant flow of unfolding mental experience, a stream of awareness, a stream of consciousness. And to make sense of that flow or stream of consciousness, we create mind to understand that. Mind also is merely labelled. Mind also, like the cup, is empty of independent existence. So also we have causality within the mind. So we have causality happening and emptiness at the same time. So then, at the physical level, the mental level, there's nothing moving through time, no thing moving through time. There's just a flow of change. So then, what is the Buddhist answer to what goes from life to life? The question is loaded. I mean, when we say what goes, we're sort of implying what is the thing that is moving from this life to the next. And so, of course, if that is what we mean by go, what is the thing that goes from this life to next? The answer, of course, is nothing. Nothing. Because there's nothing in the physical world, in the mental world, that moves through time. But if we don't use the word go in that sense, there is an answer, and it was sort of implied here in His Holiness's reply, and the answer is the mere eye. What does that mean? Of course, the mere eye is not a thing moving through time. So when we say mere eye, we mean person, of course, that's merely labelled. So let's have a look at that. So this is our life from beginning to end. And this is the present moment. The me that exists right now is a me merely labelled on the basis of the body that is present here and the mind that is present now. The dependent me, the merely labelled me. So that's the me that exists right now. And at every point in this life, the me that exists is a me merely labelled on the mind that is existing at that time and the body that's existing at that time. And similarly then, when we come to the point of death, then in Buddhism we talk about, in the death process we go through like 8 stages. And in the first 4 stages, this coarse body is shutting down. And our mind that we have now is called the coarse mind, because that's based on the coarse body, that's shutting down. So the me that's undergoing this first 4 stages is a me merely labelled on this body and this mind. Then at the end of the 4th stage, this coarse body is shut down, so breathing stops, brain activity stops and so forth. And then over the next 3 stages, we have the subtle body, which is subtle energies, and the subtle mind, which is supported on that, are shutting down. So over these 3 stages, the me that's undergoing that experience is a me merely labelled on the body and the mind that is present at that time. Of course, the body at that time is not this body, it's a subtle body, so the me is at that point, of course, no longer human, but there is a me. Then at the last stage, after the 7th stage, the subtle body is shut down, and then at the last stage we have the very subtle body and very subtle mind. Very subtle body is a very subtle wind energy and the very subtle mind supported on that at that last stage. And so the me that's undergoing that is a me merely labelled on that. Then at that point, this very subtle mind disconnects from this body and we move into what's called the bardo. And the bardo just means the intermediate state between this life and next. And there we take on a subtle body and a subtle mind. So the me that's going through the bardo is a me merely labelled on that subtle body, subtle mind. Then at the end of that time, if we're going to be human again, that mind connects with the fertilised egg in the womb. And the next life begins. And then the me at that point, of course, is a me merely labelled on the beginnings of this body and the mind that's supported on that. So what we see here, at all times, the me is a me that's merely labelled on the body and the mind at that time. So the answer then is what goes from life to life is the mere I, but of course we can see here the mere I is not a thing jumping from one life to the next. It's just the continuum of change. No, I, me, person, same. So this is what His Holiness is saying, is that emptiness does not negate accumulating karma, taking rebirth and so forth, because the flip side of emptiness is really functioning world, causality. And we see that here. So there's no contradiction between things being like an illusion and accumulating merit, accumulating karma, and taking rebirth. Does that make any sense?
No.
No.
I don't understand what you mean mere I. What is the difference between this and I?
Nothing. Mere I,
It's only a thing. What do you mean by mere I?
just like a cup is a mere cup. Mere means merely labelled, only existing in conceptual framework. So cup.
But who labeled it? The mind? Our mind?
Yeah. We label me.
You said the mind is also labeled.
Yeah, sure. We're not talking about who or what's labeling. We're talking about
The dream continuum.
yeah. So we're talking about how things exist. So this cup only exists within our conceptual framework. But that doesn't mean we're just hallucinating. I mean, there's causality there, functioning world. So this is the key to understanding emptiness, is that emptiness means functioning world. Functioning world means emptiness. Me, functioning me, means emptiness. Emptiness means functioning me. They're the two sides of the coin. That's the correct view. And if we understand that, we can say the mere I, the merely labelled me, goes from life to life, but we're not holding on to something that is jumping from one life to the next. Because in the physical world, there's nothing moving through time. There's just change. And in the mental world, just change. And if we understand that, then we can say things like that.
So how come there are many mere eyes, like many different, I mean, we have...
Just like there's many cups. I'm not sure I understand the
I
question.
don't understand the personal mere I.
Personal. Well, that's what we mean by I, me. So we have a continuity of a body, we have continuity of mind.
But the mere I is always changing.
Well, so same as everything in the world. Everything's always changing. No, always. There's not one single thing in the universe that doesn't change. Everything's always changing. Physically, mentally, me, body, mind, everything. It's just constant change. And in that...
But at the same time, we have only one mere I.
You know, just like we have one cup there. We don't have 3 cups there. But yet that doesn't mean it exists independently, just because there's one cup. And this is sort of the argument, the response, and that's what His Holiness is saying, is that, you know, we can talk about me, you, and so forth, or cup, but that doesn't mean that it exists independently, inherently, from its own side. And this is the key. This is the difficult point. Because for us, it seems like that's the case. Because we're grasping onto that. But this is the whole point here of emptiness, is saying that's not the way. That's not. There's appearance and reality. They're not matching now.
Just to see if I understand that. I think the conceptual and the conventional world, we used to use this element, the conventional truth in our life.
Correct.
And the emptiness, it's different, like different material. And we try to understand it with our logic, something that is flow, something that it's endless, something that there is continuation. And we are understanding everything like it is now, but it's not the right way.
But again,
We
you
are
said...
using different, we try to understand with the conventional mind, something that it's look like abstract. Like it's
Right, but again...
nothing to hold.
Yeah, so...
Like looking for awareness.
Right, but I mean, all... Exactly.
Rest in the awareness.
Yeah.
What is awareness?
Yeah.
Where do I have to rest? Put it down, something.
So again, just... I mean, even you said convention. But even the word convention, doesn't that suggest something? It's just convention? Doesn't that mean agreement? Doesn't that mean not existing from its own side? Already just saying that is already breaking down our false view. And the problem is that we don't see conventions as conventions, do we? We don't see that it's merely a convention we're calling this cup. It seems like that's a cup there. Whether or not we call it a cup or not, that's a cup. But what we've seen, and we can understand through systematic investigation, it's merely a convention, a useful convention, necessary convention to function. And so the only way that we can really see that experientially is through emptiness. through negating what we grasp onto now, through not seeing conventions as conventions, seeing them as real things, there, independent. And by investigating that, to come to see that's not how they are, i.e. experiencing and realizing emptiness. When we have that, then we come out, then experientially we'll see this is merely labeled, it's merely a convention.
It's kind of a habit to grasp it.
Oh, of course, because...
We want to hold it.
Exactly, because things have always appeared to us in this way. They've appeared, they seem like they're there independently. We've never seen things in any other way, and so of course we're just going to accept that. But that's why we need to question appearances through systematic investigation. And if we can do that and then apply that in meditation and come to see experientially things are not existing as they appear, that will have a very strong effect on our distorted view of grasping.
Is it right to say that the things that goes through time is cause and effect?
Cause and effect, okay.
Because every present is an effect, is...
Yeah, okay, let's go back here. Yeah, the seed and the plant. Is this a cause or an effect?
Both of them.
Both. So is there a cause becoming an effect? Or is this both an effect and a cause, depending on perspective?
I'm trying to understand karma.
Right, so it's the same thing here, though. Is that an effect or a cause?
It's both of them.
Yeah. From its own side? If it's both of them, it can't be either from its own side, can it? It's merely convention, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we don't have a cause from its own side giving a result from its own side, do we? So there's no causality going through time, is there? Isn't it just causality? Isn't that a useful concept to help explain the flow of change? Isn't it?
Just a useful explanation, that's it?
Well, it is. It's a concept. Yeah, it's a useful explanation to explain this. Yeah. Isn't it? Isn't the idea of seed and plant helpful? The seed produces plant. Isn't that useful in making sense? Yeah. Isn't it the idea of cause and result? Isn't that a convention that we agree on? Isn't it? Yeah. Good. But again, that does not mean it doesn't exist and it's just made up. So again, we need to hold emptiness and functioning world together. This is a way of looking at functioning world.
It's the law of nature. It's not something...
But again, law of nature,
Okay, it's a concept.
who made the law? We did. Gravity. Isn't that just a concept to explain movement?
Yes. Point of view.
Time. Isn't time a concept to explain change?
Okay.
But again, when we start talking like that, people go, oh, then nothing really exists. But again, that's why we're sliding into nihilism. So this is the difficult points, find that middle way, is to see that things are just merely labelled and there's a functioning world. In fact, they mean the same thing. They mean the same thing. They're not the same thing because they're two sides of a coin, but they mean the same thing. So again, when we talk about mere I, merely labelled, people go, oh, nothing really exists, nothing really matters. That's the wrong understanding.
Just to hold them together, the emptiness
Exactly.
and the...
And the functioning world, or causality, or whatever, how you want to label it, or however you want to call it.
Well, would it be right to say that what travels through time, okay, is actually the settled mind, and at one lifetime it rides upon one merely labeled I, And that's what, I'm trying to create,
Right, but isn't the subtle mind, we're talking about one stream of mind.
Exactly.
So,
Beginningless.
but subtle mind is just a level.
Yeah.
So a subtle mind is not a thing moving through time, is it?
Well, I don't know the exact word, but the essence of the mind goes on and on and on.
Well,
Collects karma and causes.
yeah, but where is the essence here? Where is the essence here? Where's the essence? But there's continuity, there's causality, there's continuity and causality.
Some essence.
What essence? What essence?
Energy. False
Energy, but isn't energy to describe something physical? Isn't that a concept? It's not? Energy exists from its own side?
No, but the point is that there is no beginning nor end, and energy,
Right, and that's exactly the point here. That's exactly the point where His Holiness says, back on verse number 10, why should sentient beings be truly existent due merely to long continuity?
Yes.
Just because it's existing a long time, why does that mean it truly exists? It doesn't. There's no logic there.
Just like the cup again.
Yeah, there's no logic there.
Well, human beings.
Right, but again,
The mind is something else.
well, it's not physical, but there's just like the body is a continuity of physical change, the mind is a continuity of mental change. So, that's okay. Fine.
Why does the mere eye, after the bardo, needs to take again a subtle body and a subtle mind?
After the bardo, it doesn't. It takes coarse body, coarse mind. It becomes, in the next life is coarse. This is coarse body, coarse mind.
Why?
Why? Because of causality. Like, why does a seed become a plant? Because that's the continuity, that's the causality here. So why does this continue like that? Because that's the causality, because of these imprints, karmic imprints, which of course also don't exist from their own side. But that is part, this idea of this karmic imprints is helpful. The idea of karmic imprints, of course, again, is just a concept, like everything. It's a useful concept to describe this flow of causality. That's all it is. It's a concept to describe this causality of mere eye. Why does this happen through that causality? Just like, why does the seed become the plant through that causality? Same. And that's why if we understand that, if we affect causes and conditions, then we get a different result, don't we? Here, if we understand this causality, what happens here if we poison the seed? Different conditions. Do we get a plant? No. So what happens here if we poison the mental afflictions? We get rid of the mental afflictions. We don't get the next life. We get a different result because we understand causality. But of course now we don't understand causality with respect to us. We say, that person made me suffer. They're the cause of my suffering. And that's why we fight with them and we don't get anywhere. But if we understood causality, if we wanted to get rid of anger, we'd get rid of the cause, which is the mental affliction. So if we get rid of the mental affliction, then we get a different result. We get not this, we get nirvana or enlightenment, simply through understanding causality.
Simply.
Simply.
And there are also concepts.
Huh?
These are also concepts.
Yeah, but when we have to be careful when we say concept. We're not saying we are a concept. A cup is not a concept. You can't drink from a concept. What we're saying is cup only exists within a conceptual framework. It's merely labelled. But if you go around and saying a cup is a concept, the word cup is a concept, but this is not a concept. You can't drink water from a concept. No? Doesn't work. If you've ever tried it, it won't work. It's not going to work. But you drink from a cup, which of course is merely labelled, exists within a conceptual framework. That cup you can drink from, of course.
Is enlightenment is also merely labeled?
Of course.
So
Therefore, it functions.
So love is not a concept?
Love is a concept. Therefore, love exists. And one functions. But again, the experience of love is not a concept. Just like this is not a concept. Yeah.
So can we say that actually we've got nothing else to say about all phenomena only, but that it doesn't exist from its own side?
So the whole point of this chapter 9, they're merely labelled. They do not exist from their own side. And therefore, if we can bring that into experience, we can eliminate all mental afflictions and suffering. And so we're running out of time, and I really want to present something quite important before we finish here, and that is this chart here, this suffering and its causes chart. Why is it that this grasping onto independent me, independent world, why is it that that is the root of all of our mental afflictions and suffering? And so this sort of explains it. So let's do that now. So that was some new chart from yesterday. So if you haven't got one, I think there's some copies there. Oh, some down the back. Some down the back. No, down the back. Yeah, I think they're all down the back extras if you need.
Charts are merely labeled.
Merely labelled. Chart is merely labelled. Yes.
Which one? What's the title of this one?
Chart.
The top.
What's the title of the chart?
Suffering and its causes.
Ah, okay.
You have it? Good. So this, and again, this is based on a quote here from Nagarjuna from this Mula Madhyamika Karika, the Fundamental Wisdom of the Middle Way, chapter 18, verse 5. He says, by extinguishing actions and mental afflictions, there is liberation. Actions and mental afflictions arise from misconceptions, and misconceptions arise from elaborations. Elaborations will cease through cultivating emptiness. So let's have a look at that, unpack that, and we can unpack it in 6 steps. The first step is called seed of ignorance. And here, ignorance in Madhyamika is grasping to independent me, independent world, grasping to things existing from their own side, existing inherently. Seed of ignorance means habit of ignorance, habit of grasping, and we've had that habit since we were born and well before, according to Buddhism. Now, every time when we look out on the world appears to exist completely independent of us. As we've seen here in Madhyamika, there's a discrepancy between appearance and reality. And so what we are receiving now is what's called dualistic appearance. There seems to be subject-object duality, independent me, independent world. And of course, this Madhyamika view of emptiness is saying this is deceiving us. So this is called mistaken dualistic appearance. Now, everything has always appeared to us in this way. So we never question these appearances. And since we have the habit of believing and grasping to those appearances, we grasp. And again, this is not intellectual, it's instinctive. So that leads us to step 2. Ignorance. So here we're grasping onto independent me, independent world. Again, instinctively, not intellectually. Every time we experience something, we have this mental factor called feeling present.
This is the mental factors?
This is a mental factor feeling, which is a translation of the Sanskrit term Vedana. And this mental factor, and of course in Buddhism we talk often about 51 mental factors, is simply experiencing things as either pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Neutral just means neither pleasant nor unpleasant. So, let's say we're looking at this cup. That cup appears to exist completely independent of us. We have the habit of believing that. We just accept, yep, there's a cup there, existing from its own side. And let's say when we're looking at the cup, we're having a pleasant experience. That pleasant experience, together with belief that that cup is existing there independent of us, will naturally lead us to assume there must be some attractive quality there that's causing my pleasant experience. So we'll see this as inherently attractive or attractive from its own side. And of course, according to this Madhyamika view of emptiness, this is a misconception. Or if I'm having an unpleasant experience when I see that cup, together with the belief that that cup is existing there independent of me, that will naturally lead me to assume there must be some unattractive quality there that's causing my unpleasant experience. So we'll see that as unattractive from its own side, inherently unattractive. Or if I'm having a neutral experience, there must be some inherently neutral quality there. Once we get to step 3, step 4 easily follows. Because if, let's again say I'm looking at this cup, I'm having a pleasant experience. I like pleasant experiences, I want pleasant experiences. That cup seems to be causing my pleasant experience. I want that cup. Attachment. Or if I'm having an unpleasant experience when I see that cup, I don't like unpleasant experiences, I don't want them, that cup seems to be causing my unpleasant experience, get it out of here, aversion. Or if I'm having a neutral experience when I see that cup, that will simply reinforce my mistaken belief that that cup exists independent of me, which of course is ignorance, but often here in this step we see the word confusion rather than ignorance. Confusion here doesn't mean we're confused about whether or not this is a cup. We're confused about how it exists. So confusion is the same meaning as ignorance. So what we see here is the 3 poisons, the 3 main mental afflictions. All other mental afflictions come out of one of those or a combination of them. That is what's driving our behavior. And of course, the Buddha's assertion is every action we do based on a mental affliction has a result, and the result of our actions are our experiences. And our various experiences, of course, the Buddha described that in the First Noble Truth as suffering or dukkha. So this is how our grasping to independent me, independent world leads to mental afflictions and leads to suffering, to dukkha. So what we see here, of course, is that this is the First Noble Truth, and these mental afflictions and the actions that they lead to is the Second Noble Truth. And so the 12 links, of course, is a particular presentation of this causality describing the process of rebirth. Whereas this is really just describing the process within a life. So, yes, that process you have to it goes over a couple of lives, so you have to add more links to get the complete picture. But yes, there's some overlap and similarity here, of course, yes. Now, a couple things to add to this. We said that everything appears to us to exist completely independent of us. But that's, Madhyamika is saying that's not how they exist. Then you may ask, well, why do they appear like that if that's not really how they exist? Why? And the answer is here is ignorance. Every time we're grasping, we're reinforcing the habit of grasping. But there's also a side effect of ignorance, which is called latency of ignorance, sometimes called stain of ignorance. What that does is that means that when we come into contact with an object, that object appears to exist in a mistaken dualistic way. So these stains of ignorance, I often use the analogy, it's like looking out on the world through these stains of ignorance. So when we're looking out on the world through these stains of ignorance, everything appears to exist completely independent of us. That's why we have this mistaken dualistic appearance. And so, as Nagarjuna says, if we go back to his verse, he says, by extinguishing actions and mental afflictions, so that's 1 to 4, by extinguishing that, there is liberation, because we've extinguished dukkha then, because that's the cause of dukkha. Actions and mental afflictions arise from misconceptions, and misconceptions arise from elaboration. So here the word elaboration is another name for grasping, for ignorance. So elaboration here means ignorance. And then elaborations or ignorance will cease through cultivating emptiness. So this grasping to independent me, independent world, will cease through cultivating emptiness, to come to an insight into emptiness, to come to realize there is no independent me, no independent world. So if we overcome this ignorance through the wisdom of emptiness, we'll overcome mental afflictions and suffering, and we'll be liberated. So therefore, this here is called, we see this in the bottom of the chart, the afflictive obscurations. Here it says the afflictive obscurations, conception of inherent existence along with its seeds. But also there we can add the mental afflictions. Or if you want to be more precise, we can just talk about this. So therefore, the garlic smell is this. So that's a good point. So to explain these stains, sometimes you'll find in the text they use the analogy, if you have a bowl, if you put garlic in the bowl, even if you take the garlic out, the garlic has stained the bowl with the smell. So that's a little bit like this idea, that the ignorance stains the mind, which means that if even you take out ignorance, the stain is still there. Meaning that he says here in Nagarjuna that to achieve liberation we need to get rid of this. These are called the afflictive obscurations. Ignorance, and sometimes you add the mental afflictions as well, or you can just use ignorance. So if we get rid of this, we get rid of this, we get rid of this, we're liberated, we achieve nirvana. So if we get rid of these afflictive obscurations, we can achieve nirvana. Meaning that even if we achieve nirvana, these stains are still here, difficult to get rid of. So even someone who's achieved nirvana and arhat, when they look around the world still appears to exist completely independent of them. But because they've realized emptiness, they're like a lucid dream, they know that this is not how things exist, so that never causes a problem, because they're lucid all the time. So again, also in a lucid dream, the dream world still appears to exist independent of us, but because we're lucid now, we'll know directly that this appearance is deceptive and we never buy into it. Similarly in our heart, same as that. No. But then we need to get rid of these stains and the mistaken appearance that they produce. So this is called the cognitive obscurations. So this is what we need to then keep working on, again through the emptiness practice, but we need the power of bodhicitta behind that, and then we can get rid of these stains and thereby get rid of this mistaken dualistic appearance. And if we get rid of that, then we can achieve enlightenment. Well, much later than that. I mean, path of meditation is just the first direct realization of emptiness. This, if we're looking at the Mahayana path, for those who know a little bit about it, we talk about the 10 grounds or 10 bhumis. This happens at the end of the 7th. End of the 7th. And then this we get rid of over 8, 9, and 10.
Very end.
Yeah. I mean, these we get rid of from 1 to 7. And then
What do we get rid of in the passive thing?
just what's called the intellectually acquired ignorance. The easy one. The easy one. So I just want to add one or two more things, and then maybe there's a few questions here. So this is sort of simply the difference between nirvana and enlightenment. We need to get rid of these stains if we want to move on to enlightenment. But here, back here, again, if we're seeing something and we're having a pleasant experience, experientially, the beauty really seems to be there. That's why we have attachment, because it seems like that's causing my pleasant experience. But is the beauty to be found in the object? Because if the beauty was there from its own side, it would mean everyone who looked there would have to see beauty. They'd have to see beauty because it's there objectively. But don't we say beauty is in the eye of the beholder? And again, maybe many of us in this room accept that intellectually. Does that help? I mean, if we really reminded ourselves all the time, it may help a little bit, but not so much. So what we need to do is, of course, bring that intellectual understanding, beauty in the eye of the beholder, and also ugliness is in the eye of the beholder, into experience through meditation. So if we come to realize emptiness, then after that, if emptiness is still affecting our mind, after that, when we come out of meditation, then experientially we'll appreciate beauty in the eye of the beholder, meaning that will be like a lucid dream. When you're lucid, I mean, if you're not lucid in a dream, you see something pleasant, craving, unpleasant, aversion, fear, anxiety. If you become 100% lucid, then if you see something attractive in the dream, it would become very difficult to have attachment. Because you'll realize there's no beauty there, objectively. And what it means, of course, is then you'll appreciate the beauty much more. You'll enjoy the beauty much more. And then if we see something unpleasant, we'll know the unpleasantness is not there, which means we won't react, which means we won't suffer. And so that's the same thing here, is that if we realize emptiness and it's still affecting our mind after the meditation, experientially we'll see beauty in the eye of the beholder, which means when we see something pleasant, it would be very hard to have attachment, and we would enjoy that beauty much more than we do now. And if something unpleasant comes up, we see that it's not there, which means we wouldn't react with aversion, which means we wouldn't induce any suffering. So in fact, on that note, there's a nice saying I like that says, pain is mandatory, suffering is optional. For us, pain is mandatory, suffering is mandatory, because we have aversion, we grasp. But if you get rid of grasping, you can have very painful situations with no suffering. Well, it depends on how lucid you are. The more that the emptiness meditation affects our mind, the less suffering. If it affects our mind a little bit, you'll find it'll take the edge off our suffering. It'll sort of reduce it a bit, the edge. But the more experience we have, the more that's affecting our mind, the less suffering. The less suffering. Any questions about any of this?
Next time we bring a bigger blackboard.
Blackboard. Maybe I can just add one little thing to this, because coming up in the text, which we're not covering now because we've more or less finished what we're going to do this weekend, here what we're saying is that this is the process that why we're stuck in dukkha due to our distorted view. But of course the Buddhist assertion is that we are cycling in this state life after life. And that is called samsara. And samsara, of course, is a Sanskrit word. Sam is a prefix, means like thoroughly. And sara is coming from the root sir, means to go, to move. So samsara is thoroughly going or moving, meaning going round and round and round. And so samsara is often translated as cyclic existence. We're cycling from one life to the next in this process. And of course, how that process cycling works, then that's the 12 links presentation, of course. So therefore, samsara is not a place. This is not samsara. Samsara is a state of mind. If our mind is contaminated by ignorance and mental afflictions, we're stuck in samsara. If we get rid of ignorance and mental afflictions, we are in nirvana. So nirvana is also not a place, it's not some alternate reality, it's a state of mind. And just briefly, the etymology of the word nirvana. The word nirvana we can divide into three. The nir is a prefix meaning fully. Va can have a number of meanings. Here it means there's two meanings, to blow, to cool. And na means the act of. The act of. So nirvana is the act of fully blowing out or the act of fully cooling. And so we see both of these etymologies used. Particularly the second one is used a lot in the Mahayana. Particularly any of you are familiar with the 12 links, then often in that diagram at the top we have the moon. And the moon is symbolizing nirvana. And that's this etymology. Because the etymology is that now we are tormented by the heat of the mental afflictions. So when we achieve nirvana, our mind is cooled from that torment. Just like the sun torments us with heat, whereas the light of the moon is a cooling effect. So hence, moon symbolizes nirvana, this cooling the mind from the torment of the mental afflictions. This first etymology is more what you see in a lot of the Theravada traditions. Often they talk about nirvana is a state where the body and mind, which is often called just the aggregates, is fully blown out like a candle. They often have this analogy that we blow out the contaminated body and mind like a candle. And so that's the etymology here. So again, nirvana is not a place, it's a state of mind. If we manage to get rid of all mental ignorance and mental afflictions, we're in nirvana.
Is enlightenment also a state of mind?
So enlightenment is, again, the state where we have also got rid of the stains of the mental afflictions. Then we're in that state of enlightenment. I think that's all I really wanted to cover. Maybe that's more than enough. So maybe if there's any, is there any last questions? Okay. So then just to sort of wrap up the text, so this chapter 9 that we're looking at, we'll look at that over a number of years, again is the perfection of wisdom. So this text from Shantideva is of course describing, as it says here, engaging in the deeds of a bodhisattva. So the deeds of the bodhisattva, the first thing of course is to become a bodhisattva, to cultivate bodhicitta. So we see the first couple of chapters of this text describes the benefits and how to cultivate that bodhicitta. And then we find the following chapters describe the practices that we need to engage in as a bodhisattva, of course the 6 perfections. And so the last of those 6 perfections is the wisdom, which is this chapter 9. And so this wisdom, of course, we've seen in the Mahayana, is to wisdom to realize emptiness. And so here in the text, very briefly, what we've covered so far is first that if we want to achieve liberation, overcome suffering, we need to cultivate wisdom. And we saw there that in the various philosophical systems, what that wisdom is differs a little bit in terms of no self and so forth. But here, of course, that wisdom is the wisdom of emptiness. And so we very briefly presented that view of emptiness. And then we have very briefly gone through some verses of refuting what's called the realists, the Vaibhashika Sautrantika schools, who grasp onto things existing inherently or independently, truly existing, to really, through that process, to better understand the view of emptiness in terms of that emptiness and causality, functioning world, are really 2 sides of a coin. That through that refutation, we're really appreciating, unlike the lower schools, which says actually they're contradictory, because if there's causality, then emptiness, if there's emptiness, they can't exist. So to really then better appreciate that emptiness and functioning world, or causality or dependent arising, are like 2 sides of a coin. And so that's what we've sort of attempted to do a little bit this morning, today. And the next section of the text, where we'll start next year, is then moving into refuting the Chittamatra view particularly. Because also Chittamatra assert true existence, but have a little bit more subtle view than the Vaibhashika Sautrantika. So then we'll look at their view and see how it's actually beneficial as a stepping stone, but also then what the limitations of that view is, and then using that view, also by refuting that view, come to better appreciate the Madhyamika view in the process of doing that. And then, of course, after that comes the presentation of the view of emptiness, and then how to come to that understanding and realization through various reasonings and so forth. But that's sort of down the track, so we'll get to that when we get to that. So that's all I wanted to cover here this weekend. So then I'd just like to finish by thanking Shantideva Group for inviting me here and for putting this event on, and all the volunteers who were involved in helping set up and support these 2 days. And then, of course, lastly, to thank all of you for making the effort, the time and effort to come here, and I hope you got something out of it. And if you did, then don't just leave it as a nice memory, but please bring it into your life, internalize it, and then use that to improve your life and try to help people around you, because the world needs a lot of help. And already, I think, maybe Tyles mentioned already, we've already got the dates for next year.
I don't have to translate anymore because we will never get to the 32nd.
Maybe next year. This year we had to do a lot of preliminary stuff, so next year we can probably go more or less into the text a little bit. So that'll be next year, February, I think 1920. So thank you.